Now that we have details of the forthcoming September Nintendo Direct, I wanted to do a video looking at some logistics of what is specifically likely in this particular Direct and how the rest of the year and the beginning of 2026 might shape up. Yesterday, I did a deep dive on the range of different studios who might have content due for the next Direct, and a couple of weeks ago, I did a deep dive into the Mario anniversary, so I've covered a lot of things broadly around this topic. I've also covered the likely Direct hosts. But now we have some specific details, so I thought it would be worth looking at the specifics of what exactly we might see tomorrow, how this is placed, and at the end of the video, I'll put some percentage forecasts to it all so that you can hold me accountable for how I'm doing or how I'm not. Before we start, I'd just like to note that 60 minutes is a very substantial presentation, mirroring the April Direct in terms of size and scope, but of course that had a whole console to launch. It does feel to me like this is part of a trend that we've been seeing for a couple of years now, where Nintendo will do fewer but longer presentations. Secondly, we have seen major September Directs previously, and they tend to pivot towards the holiday season and its games while not revealing too much more. Note the September 2017 Direct, which actually had almost nothing truly new in terms of Switch, but was really a blowout on content we'd already learned about. Of course, 2017 was a very different time for the company, when they had a lot of struggles to scale up their development operation due to years of poor sales and still supporting the 3DS, plus they were going into a fairly barren 2018, where frankly they didn't have an awful lot to announce. I think realistically we're in a very different place now, with Nintendo going into a massive year for the company, where they will have a major movie as well as the first full year of the Switch 2. Okay, so let's look at the slots that they actually have to fill in terms of games. Firstly, I'd be surprised if there's not a September game. Whether it's a retail game, I'm now a bit cooler on just because of the logistics of getting a title into stores at such short notice, but frankly I think that is still quite doable given the precedent of Super Mario 3D All-Stars being revealed and released within a 16-day window. It's not something Nintendo usually try to do, but I could still imagine a major game being announced for the 18th or 25th of September. Another option, of course, is the Metroid Prime Remastered Gambit, where you shadow drop a title and then follow up with the physical version a few weeks later. The easiest way to do this would be to shadow drop a Plus game for Super Mario Bros. Wonder, since that game is already on the shelves, but I don't know how hype this strategy would really be compared to something like a Galaxy 2 remaster, and so I think Galaxy 2 is more likely for this kind of treatment. Then we have to look at the slots for October to December, and I'd just like to correct a few misconceptions that I've sometimes seen online. Firstly, Nintendo don't and never really has stuck to a schedule of a game a month, and particularly in October, it's unlikely that there will be just one October game. It is, I would concede, perhaps slightly more likely this year than most, purely because Pokemon Legends ZA is right in the middle of the month, making it harder to schedule stuff right around it. But we've had games with only 2 weeks or just 1 week separation before during this tight window. Two different October games is possible and actually fairly likely, especially factoring in Plus games which Nintendo have been putting out just a week after major titles. I really think we're looking at around 5 retail titles before Thanksgiving, one of which might be a Plus game. Another misconception I often see is that December is a write-off for Nintendo. I really don't think this is true. Now obviously, if you release before Black Friday, you get a longer window for the biggest sales period of the year, but that doesn't mean that December is a dead space. It's still releasing in one of the most prestigious sales spots of the year, equivalent for them to March and July in terms of importance in many respects. If we look back, we should probably take out Super Smash Bros. Ultimate as a precedent, since I'm fairly sure that game was only placed there to give Sakurai the maximum amount of time to work on the title while still delivering it within 2018. And as I've mentioned before, the presence of New Super Mario U Deluxe in early January suggests that they were going to use 2D Mario as a backup plan in case Sakurai was not able to complete Smash on time. However, Other titles that have released in December in recent years include Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Mario and Sonic at the Olympics, and Big Brain Academy Brain vs. Brain, a prestige title but with a niche audience, a Mario title but one developed by a third party, and a lower key title that nevertheless is a key part of their casual audience outreach strategy. Basically, what these have in common is that they're games where the sales potential is lower but where they do fit niche audiences. Advance Wars 1 Plus 2 Reboot Camp was originally scheduled for December as well, and Fitness Boxing has twice had December releases, and this fits the same kind of pattern. It's the same kind of title that won't appeal to everybody but does have a higher than usual chance of being given as a gift and being the kind of title that might be a win pickup during the holiday season. What I don't expect to see this year is a game in the week after Christmas. This is actually something Nintendo does do from time to time, especially in Japan, with titles like Dr. Kawashima's Brain Training launching then, but this year that option is pretty much off the table because both Christmas and New Year fall on a Thursday, which is the day that Nintendo generally releases their games. This probably slightly raises the chance of there being a game on the 8th of January, even though usually the first game of the year is around the middle of the month. So let's consider the games we know about. We have confirmed dates for Kirby Air Riders and Pokemon Legends ZA already. Let's then consider Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and actually I think there's a significant chance now that we do see Age of Imprisonment in November. Here's the rationale. Firstly, Koei Tecmo would probably rather be before Black Friday than not. Secondly, although using first-party characters and being published by Nintendo in some territories, this is essentially a third-party title, and Nintendo has always been far less concerned about clashes with titles of this nature. The first Fire Emblem Warriors released in back-to-back weeks with Super Mario Odyssey in many territories. Octopath Traveler was hiked to heaven and then dropped on the exact same date as Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, while the third-party Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope and Platinum's Bayonetta 3 released next to each other in 2022. There's also the observation some people have made that the Southern Hemisphere release window has been given as spring, which fits November better than December or January. I think it's perfectly possible that the 13th of November is Age of Imprisonment, which would leave a gap for a 30th of October game, allowing 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after to separate it from both Pokemon Legends ZA and Hyrule Warriors. Now, I've made the case before that putting a spooky season game out on this date is something Nintendo has done before. Bayonetta 3 and Luigi's Mansion 3 both dropped in the last couple of days of October. Do they want to position Metroid Prime 4 as this kind of title? Well, it's possible. At this point, the question is really, though, whether Metroid Prime 4 is better dropped before or after Thanksgiving, which means it's either October or December, or a delay, which I think is unlikely given the game's history until now and how much Nintendo have pushed it in the Switch 2 lineup. While the 30th of October slot is tempting at this point, it feels like after makes increasing sense. Nintendo has precedent for announcing a December game in the September slot. Recall Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was announced in the September 2017 Direct. It avoids Call of Duty's 11th of November slot, and I'm really not quite sure how much Nintendo worries about these kinds of clashes, but in any event, Metroid Prime really does fit the profile of previous December games, and it might be a very good place for it. If people are interested in buying a game for the holiday season but aren't particularly sure what, then Metroid Prime might be the kind of title that could be given as an off-chance gift. We know that the combined sales of Metroid Dread and Metroid Prime Remastered were only around 5 million, which means that Metroid Prime Remastered sold less than 2 million in total, at least up until that announcement earlier in the year. Nintendo has put Metroid Prime 4 into October and November slots before, but in this instance, I don't think it really needs that real estate. Whether that is likely to damage Metroid Prime 4 in the long term, well, personally I don't think so, but I may come back to this topic another time. Now, leaving the 30th of October slot clear does open a possibility of a Luigi's Mansion 4 this holiday. I mentioned this in my studio wrap-up video yesterday, as there's a load of mood music that would make Luigi's Mansion 4 make some kind of sense. Of course, if Nintendo don't want to commit to a full-on Luigi's Mansion 4 right now, there is another option, and that is a Plus game. Luigi's Mansion 3 would fit the profile of titles like Kirby and the Forgotten Land in terms of being a major Switch evergreen that could continue to sell at a higher price on Switch 2 and would benefit from being pushed into the spotlight for the many people who bought their original Switch since 2019 when the game launched. Aside from this, I've already said that I fully expect at least one and probably two or even more Mario titles in this window. Not necessarily full retail titles, though. August's Hello Mario is already one, and the 35th anniversary had Mario Kart Live Home Circuit and Super Mario Bros. 35, so we can see that non-full retail titles still have a place in Nintendo's considerations. But Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Super Mario Galaxy 2 Remaster feel like the kind of support I would expect to see during this period. However, the September Direct won't just flesh out games for this holiday season. We also need to consider 2026. Generally, Nintendo has 2 or 3 games, with often a very significant and high-profile one for March. Splatoon Raiders would definitely fit this profile. Tomodachi Life could as well, given how high selling it was on 3DS, but it's still a rather obscure franchise these days, and the March slot tends to be more of a core audience game, with the obvious exception of Animal Crossing New Horizons, which straddled casuals and core fans. This slot has a particular significance this year because it will be the last game to release before the movie. In 2022, they gave this to Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and while most of that game's sensational sales were attributed to the fantastic gameplay and the decision to move into 3D for the first time, I wonder if placing a platformer with youth appeal alongside a major film had a similar impetus. Splatoon is their franchise which skews youngest, albeit mainly in Japan, and so while it's not a platformer, I can see it making sense for this window. Obviously, the Splatoon Raiders development time is going to be contingent on EPD5 and how quickly they can produce the game, but they've turned around games with a 2-year window before, and with Side Order releasing on the 22nd of February 2024, it would be a full 2 years since the DLC was completed, and potentially the DLC did not include all of the core development team. Of course, the obvious title will be an actual Mario title. Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury launched in February 2021, and having a February or March Mario would surely be logical, given that they seem to associate the anniversary window with the 6-month period flowing into the beginning of the next financial year. I've long tipped some kind of Mario Studios type game, possibly just a 3D Mario Maker, possibly a game that absorbs art making, music making, and 3D modeling into a larger game with Mario's face on it. It seems to me like a logical accompaniment to the Switch 2's mouse mode. Either way, I think it's odds on that we'll see something Mario this window, although this could include Yoshi's Woolly World at a stretch. Another title I think could be dated for this quarter is Pokemon Champions. There will almost certainly be a Pokemon blowout on the 27th of February for Pokemon Day, so having Pokemon Champions release right after, on the 5th of March, would allow for that title to be pushed as the first entry in a massive year of Pokemon-related content. This is almost a direct mirror of the way that Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team Director's Cut was placed in 2020, being exactly a week after Pokemon Day. Of course, they could announce something all new for Pokemon, but it feels unlikely that they'll want to scoop Pokemon Legends ZA at this point, and in any event, the Pokemon Company usually like to do the heavy lifting for their own presentations. One other option for Champions would be the spring quarter, as we saw with new Pokemon Snap's April slot, but given it's the anniversary year, I wouldn't be surprised if the Pokemon Company have another retail title for the spring and summer window, as well as the almost inevitable Gen 10 Pokemon title for November 2026, and in this case it might make sense to release Pokemon Champions all the sooner. If my hunches are right, March will be quite full, but we can expect 2 or perhaps even 3 games in January and February. Currently, we have Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven dated for 2026. I suspect Tomodachi is more likely for May or thereabouts, as Nintendo has a penchant for putting more casual titles in this window. But having said that, I think there's a lot of promotion they could do for Tomodachi Life, and particularly with the Miis around the movie. Given how huge Funko Pop figures have become, imagine if there was some way to build your own custom Mii. This is the kind of oddball initiative that would be great to promote alongside a movie release, encouraging whim merchandising sales. It's not impossible that Tomodachi is being saved for late 2026, of course. The logic here would be that as long as they've got a big Switch game on the horizon, people won't start worrying about Nintendo support drying up for the system. But equally, Nintendo want to pivot to Switch 2, so they don't want to burn through those Switch releases too quickly. I still think it likely that the next Pokemon will be cross-gen, given how the Pokemon Company have historically clung to older hardware for much longer than the rest of Nintendo. Black 2 and White 2 was released 16 months after the 3DS launched and on DS hardware, which is pretty much a timeline mirror for when Gen 10 Pokemon would likely drop. Therefore, after February, Nintendo will have a game that says, yes, Switch fans will still have games to play, and so it makes sense for them to keep their powder dry on Tomodachi Life for now until Pokemon is announced. Perhaps it will feature in the Direct, but I think it's probably less likely to receive a date right now. Rhythm Heaven is a smaller title and maybe more likely, of course. One other thing I should mention, a casual title is not impossible. 2012 had Sing Party, 2019 had the abrupt drop of Ring Fit Adventure. Even if it's for the original Switch, something smaller, Fitness Boxing 4 perhaps, could be in there. Perhaps Rhythm Heaven counts as that. It depends, I suppose, how they position it. I also think Nintendo will want a game as well that reaches into the spring quarter next year, and to be honest, I struggle to see much past Fire Emblem as the likeliest option here. I've talked before about why Intelligent Systems is overdue and why this quarter seems to be a favoured slot. Now, I should add a word of caution here in that there are a lot of reasons why Fire Emblem may not appear in this particular Direct, and we can all remember the way that Fire Emblem was announced for 2018 and then ultimately delayed into 2019 and then delayed again from spring 2019 to July. It's possible as well that Intelligent Systems will face the same kind of delays this year as they adapt to the Switch 2 hardware. Also, moving past Fire Emblem, it would feel really odd to go into the movie release window without being able to show trailers of a forthcoming major Mario title on Switch. Even if the most extreme scenario comes to pass that the next Mario game isn't going to be due until 2028, they can always show a title card. But realistically, the game is probably close to being done, except that, like Tears of the Kingdom for that year before it's released, it will be subject to extensive testing. We know that the Donkey Kong Bonanza group branched off the main team in 2020, and I can't believe that Motokura and company weren't prototyping ideas before then. 6, 7, 8 years would take us to a 2026 or 2027 release date, and if the last year of that is polishing, they're going to have something extensive to show, although they may not want to show all that right now. If they do reveal the next Mario, it delivers the big hype bomb that they need, and it gives them cover for other reveals to be a bit more low-key. If their big new announcements before March are Yoshi's Woolly World and something of the scope a Golden Sun or a Fossil Fighters, I don't think people will mind nearly as much. What I wouldn't expect is anything Zelda-ish. I think there'll be Zelda stuff coming down the chute alright, and I recently put out a huge video as to what that might be, but I don't think it's yet Zelda's time. Same with Animal Crossing. I expect the new game 2027 or probably 2028 around the release of a light system. However, given how Nintendo is massively pushing franchises like Metroid, Donkey Kong and Kirby at present, this might be a good moment for a spin-off game in the Animal Crossing franchise. Perhaps that Camelot game is Animal Crossing Golf after all. If the next Animal Crossing game is 2.5 years away, it would kind of make sense to have something Animal Crossing in between, and there is precedent in Happy Home Designer of Nintendo introducing a feature as an original game that they can then cannibalize into the main title as DLC, and they did this with Happy Home Paradise. I think it's unlikely, but not inconceivable. Okay, so let's try to draw all of this together. I'm going to give an illustrative sketch first of all of what I think is plausible, and then I'll get into specific forecasts after that. I could see them following the April format of sectioning the first and third party reveals far more, and I also think that Mario will have his own section. This would give us 3 major phases of the Direct. Phase 1 would be non-Mario first-party content exploring the 3 holiday games we currently know about: Metroid Prime 4, Kirby Air Riders, and Pokemon Legends ZA. They could start either with a Fire Emblem reveal, perhaps dated for spring 2026, or with Splatoon Raiders, also potentially dated for 2026 and maybe even for February or March. In the middle, we could see a handful of smaller titles. I'd expect something reusing past content, Yoshi's Woolly World or a Pikmin 4 Plus game, and an original game, probably of a more off-kilter nature, Golden Sun, Fossil Fighters, Wario Land, etc. I mean, there are a lot of candidates for this. Phase 2 would focus on third parties, and we know Nintendo has an awful lot to show here, although I won't go into the specifics of all the third-party content. During this section, I expect they will, though, drop a release date for Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. Phase 3 then would be Mario. Super Mario Galaxy 2, Super Mario Bros. Wonder as a Plus game, movie news, almost certainly something utterly left field with Mario, and then ending with a small, early tease that a new 3D Mario is coming. All told, half a dozen new games, but some of them remakes or remasters, and only a small mention for a true AAA title beyond this year. That feels to me enough for it to feel like they've blown the doors off without revealing so much that it capsizes their 2025 advertising, and it keeps something in reserve for the beginning of next year so that they can have a really dramatic start to 2026. Alright then, let's put all this into actual forecasts. As I always say, the point of the percentages is not that they are based in some precise calculations, but simply that I can use these numbers to reflect back on how accurate I was or wasn't and calibrate my judgments going forward. The theory being that my 90% call should be right 9 times in 10 and my 30% calls correct 3 times in 10 and so on. So, 90% forecasts. 90% I think the Direct will confirm at least 3 first-party retail games total to release before Thanksgiving, but we already know 2, so as long as neither of those get moved, we'll at least get 1 more. 90% I think we'll get a Mario game announced in the September Direct. That feels really certain to me. 90% I think we'll get a reference to Nintendo Switch Online, if only in the form of Super Mario Sunshine being mentioned. 90% I think we'll see Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and 90% I think there'll be another Nintendo Switch 2 edition announced. 70% forecast then? Well, 70% I think the Direct will confirm at least 4 first-party retail games total to release before Thanksgiving, so 2 more than we already have. 70% there'll be a new game announced that's not a Mario title and not a remake or remaster either. Wario Land, Golden Sun, Sing Party and so on being examples of this category. 70% I think we'll get some reference to Game Chat. 70% also I think something first party will be shadow dropped. 50% forecasts. I think the Direct will confirm at least 5 first-party retail games total to release before Thanksgiving. 50% I think the Direct will have 5 or more new first-party games, although this includes Nintendo Switch 2 edition titles and small downloadable titles. Something on the scale of Hello Mario would count. 50% we see Pokemon Champions dated to the first half of 2026, although, as I said, I really think it's going to be in March. 50% Tomodachi Life appears at all in the September Direct. This feels like the kind of game that they could easily hold over to talk more about until the beginning of next year. 50% at this point, I think we see Metroid Prime 4 in December. 50% will get a Mario spin-off character title announced, Wario Land, Yoshi, Luigi's Mansion, or so on. 30% forecasts. Well, 30% I think that Tomodachi Life is talked about, and in which case it may be dated to the spring. It's not flat out likely, but still feels possible. 30% chance then we'll see a new Nintendo published casual title, e.g. Sing Party, Fitness Boxing. 30% chance Sakurai appears in person. While Kirby Air Riders will have a big showcase, they may want to focus on gameplay footage only. Then again, Sakurai is probably as big a draw for many as Kirby himself, so I could see this being a reasonable likelihood, if not outright likely. 10% forecasts. There's a 10% chance only that Metroid Prime 4 is delayed to 2026. I don't expect it at all, but obviously you can't rule it out entirely. 10% we will see Golden Sun in this Direct. I think the odds of seeing it in the next year or so are a bit higher, but this might not be the time. 10% we see a new Animal Crossing game. 10% a Wario Land is announced. 10% Fossil Fighters announced, 10% Kid Icarus, 10% a karaoke game, 10% F-Zero, 10% a Star Fox title. Oh, and if you check out the Patreon, there's a video on something that's probably not even a 10% chance, but a big thanks to a member of the Patreon who mentioned the wonderful and obscure mysterious Murasame Castle the other day, and so I thought I'd put together a video on that very intriguing topic. That's it for this video, however. Happy Direct, everybody, and I will see you after. Thanks for watching, do check out the Patreon for more, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.